So Fernando, you are a senior economist at the OECD, and you also lead this new group, Marriott. And I have with me on stage Annie Järvelin and Garance Legrand from the Swedish Research Council and Vinnova, who you know. But now I will leave the scene or the screen to you, Fernando, and we are very interested in hearing more about Marriott. So please.
So good morning again, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's both a pleasure and an honor to be invited to provide some keynote remarks at this important event. Just by way of introduction, I head the secretariat at the OECD that supports the OECD Working Party of National Experts on Science Technology Indicators and this newly established Marriott group. And it's really a pleasure to be invited to say a few words about this new group, because it's in a sense it's a kind of it's a startup that we have created very recently, and we are quite impressed by the degree of interest that is out there. So let me just in my remarks, let me give you a little bit of context to the establishment of this group, and also say something about what we are trying to achieve. So, okay, there is a bit of a lag with the slides, but I see that they are good display there. So that's good. So just a quick introduction. The OECD, as you probably all know, this is an international organization that is based in Paris. We have 38 member countries and the EU, and we also work with partners, and our motto is better policies for better lives. How we do this, this is very much based on the work on internationally comparable evidence and analysis, on collaborative work among the different members and partners to codify what we, through consensus, agree to codify as what represent best practices. And we also do work to support countries in their policy reform journeys. And to the right, you see some images that depict what I just said: internationally comparable evidence. You can see the cover page of the Frascati manual of the OECD, so definitions and guidance for R&D statistics, or publications on R&D statistics. Through collaborative work, we also we codify these recommendations. And sorry, I can hear people speaking very close to the mic, so it's a bit distracting. And we also do our support to countries in their policy reform journeys. I have there the example of work we did in 2000, was completed in 2016 for Sweden, a review of the innovation policy in Sweden. And I just want to underline as well the science, technology, and innovation, what I call STI, throughout this presentation, has been a core feature of the OECD since its creation. And STI data has been a very integral part of that. And the fact that we just celebrated the 60th anniversary of NESTI, of our working party, is a testament to that. And again, I'm very happy to report that how we work very closely with Sweden, and today is an example of that. So a few introductory elements about the broader landscape of science and innovation going digital. This was a subject of a big OECD horizontal effort a few years ago that preoccupied us. And one of the things we did was we conducted a survey of scientists around the world, which allowed us to see different paradigms of digitalization around the science world. And I mentioned this because these paradigms that came out through the analysis of the data, which help us characterize the degree to which different scientists engaging in digital activities, was very revealing, and I think relevant also to today's discussion. On the one hand, we identify activities that characterize the adoption of digital scientific productivity and collaboration tools, which, for example, allow for remote working, and especially that turned out to be quite important. I was quite prescient of the type of work that had to be done during COVID. Practices for the curation and diffusion of data and code. This is the open science paradigm that I think is very close to the heart of many people in the room. A third paradigm of digitalization in science, which concerns the use and development of advanced and data-intensive digital tools. is what we call the data-intensive research paradigm. And the fourth leg that is also quite important today, which has to do with digital identity and online communication of scientific work and how that relates to careers and incentives. So you can find more information about this report. I thought it was relevant to say something about this because one of the elements there touches upon some work that we have been doing in the OECD around policy recommendations for data in the science, technology, and innovation space. It was only last year that we revised the OECD recommendation concerning access to research data from public funding, which is trying to get countries to think very thoroughly about the responsibilities to make sure that the data that has been created through public funding for research and development is actually reusable, and it contributes to the broader scientific enterprise. And this slide here highlights the elements in this recommendation. And we are now doing some work, our colleagues are doing some work around the implementation of this recommendation. And more broadly, there is a wider recommendation that has to do with enhancing access and the sharing of data. And much of that has to do with working with stakeholders in the private sector, philanthropic sector, and so on. And one particular element there has to do with public sector information and the degree to which that can be used and reused by the whole of society. And with this broader introduction, I want to start diving into what is what I call the meta challenge for science, technology, and innovation policy. This was a statement that we got from New Zealand Ministry of in charge of research and science when we conducted some work on the digitalization of science, technology, and innovation policy. And it explains what were the main drivers of setting up a national research innovation system. It had to do with concerns about data quality, the possibility to reuse it, limitations to sharing and linking, and the inability to address some basic questions around policymaking and administration. And one important point to highlight is that they found this situation to be problematic for securing funding for the scientific enterprise, because this lack of information made things more difficult when it came to budget negotiations, and also compromised to some extent the fulfillment of obligations around data management principles that apply across the whole of government. I think this is quite a powerful statement that made us think a lot in our work. I will not go into detail on this, but I just wanted to highlight in this slide two key elements. Evidence in the policy cycle. This is something that most of our work is directly focused to policymakers from ministries around the world, and we have to make them think about what they can do at different stages of the policy cycle, and how data plays a very important role in evaluation, ex ante, ex post, and how it has to be linked to decision making. And there's administrative processes as part of the implementation of policies that also generate a lot of data about what's happening around the funding of R&D and the performance of R&D in particular. And that's what the part on the right of the slide represents, that data is not just an input to R&D, and data is not just an output that comes out of the R&D process, but there is also data that is generated through this process about the activity of research and development. And those of you who are involved with administration and policies around R&D, around the granting of funding and so on, you understand what this is about. And this is an area which is not explicitly covered in some of our OECD recommendations, and has kind of, I wouldn't say ignored, but hasn't played a key role in some of the top level policy discussions, at least internationally. So let me just, I want to move back to this. So what I want to highlight here in this slide is the ecosystem that applies when you want to use data to resolve practical administrative problems and meet the needs of users, or provide information and so on. On the one hand, you have to think about what data sources you have, how you work with the data, what protocols, what ontologies, how do you make it interoperable, how do you identify the different actors, what technologies and tools you use to process this data, what services you want to produce, and then ultimately what users make of it. And users are also involved in the co-creation of all these elements, because they fund the systems, they're users, they provide data, and this is all closely interrelated. And this was a concern we had, that these systems were not, there was not shared awareness across our members, our member countries, about what was happening, what were the drivers that were changing the context in which these solutions can be provided, the innovation that was happening in this place, and some international coordination issues that also apply. So we carried out a work on the digitalization of science and innovation policy and administration. And as part of this project, we also undertook an analysis of the landscape for this type of solutions and data in the case of Norway, your neighbors to the west. So this was done on request from the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research. It was a first of a kind project, and I will not go into the detail about this project. I would just invite you, when you have access to the slides, to consult this paper, because you might, I know you are always very keen to compare yourselves with your neighbors, so this could be a potentially relevant source of information. And since we did this report in 2020, there's been some reforms have been introduced, and some are still undergoing. So this is why I will not go into the detail. I just wanted to pass quickly through some of the slides that characterize the landscape of work around data of different types, characterizing the funding agencies, the ministries and the funding agencies, the role played by the Statistical Office, which is also very active on administrative data, Altin, the Uninet, Christine, which is now going a process of reform, and then a wide range of actors more on the performance space. So again, I don't want to extend myself too much with the findings, but we highlighted a number of potential opportunities to improve how the system worked, and to assess what type of choices are there to be made going forward. One, Norway starts, I think, also like Sweden, from a landscape of having a very rich valuation culture and high degrees of trust and digital infrastructures. But there is, we also identified some potential for better coordination across the vertical elements, about revisiting the types of solutions that Christine provided and how it was set up, and also highlighting the very unique role of Statistics Norway as a clearinghouse for data, bringing together administrative and statistical data, which is an important part of my presentation. And as well, the element of the international element regarding to what extent is it optimal for an individual country to develop some tools, or take some off the shelf, coordinate, adopt standards that are used in other countries, or adopt country-specific standards. These are some of the things we looked at. So with that kind of lengthy introduction, allow me to dive into why we created Marriott as an expert group within STI. So as I mentioned, we are very much coming from the perspective of a startup within, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a corporate startup. So you create something inside your group to disrupt yourself a little bit, and also deal with challenges that you were facing, that with the 16 structures and the experts around the table were not easy to handle. So a few reflections here about administrative data for science, technology, and innovation indicators and analysis, which is my job. My job is not the administration of science, technology, and innovation. It's to provide evidence about national innovation systems of science and innovation. And one observation was that the appearance that administrative data and official statistics appear to inhabit very separate worlds. many of the statistics that we publish at the OECD are based on official statistics, which rely on surveys of actors of higher education institutions, of businesses, and so on. And this is based on a number of reasons. And as we hear from many statistical offices, they tell us, well, where we can use administrative data, we use it, but where it's not available or it doesn't cover what we want to cover, then we have to go out and ask different actors to provide us with the information that we need. But administrative data is used as a complement to know who to go to and ask for information and so on. But the statistical and administrative paths are very closely intertwined. Firstly, because the actors who respond to the surveys, they need to look at some data when providing meaningful answers to the questions that they have, and they will hold this data for management and administrative purposes. They will not just do it to respond to the surveys. And this is a very important element, because if these two worlds move apart, then it's going to be more difficult for statisticians to collect the data that they need for international comparisons. And here there's the realization that administrative processes and data are very country specific. So this is a constant challenge for the international comparability of data, even when we're trying to cover phenomena that are rather universal and quite common to all countries, such as the organization of R&D. Also, administrative data structures, they can be guided by same design considerations as official statistics, and they face similar challenges. How do you assess whether the data that you have is of good quality, that is good integrity, that people are not just faking it to achieve other goals, and so on? These are challenges that we share, and in this particular area of science, technology, and innovation, secrecy is very important to have a leading advantage. This is important for the business sector, but we see that also happening in universities. You only disclose what you're really forced to disclose, and there's other linkages. But I just want to wrap up this slide by pointing out that for STI policy analysis, official statistics are not sufficient, and that requires us to think about using all possible and relevant data sources and tools. But the question here is about how to do that. And a key point of my presentation is that we need safe spaces for both dialogue and to conduct work, to think about how we can bring together different standards and to actually put data together in a safe way so that it doesn't compromise the covenants under which the data exist and are possible to use. Here we have some examples of work we have been doing at Nesti even before Marriott on administrative data. The Frascati and the Oslo Manual, they refer to administrative data in several places, but we also have a number of projects where we work with procurement data and looking at the link between procurement and innovation. We have a very well-established line of work now looking at tax data, working with tax agencies around the world to collect information about tax incentives for research and development. And this evidence actually compelled several countries to introduce incentives for tax incentives for research and development. And I believe Sweden is a case in point for that. And here is also where Marriott comes in. So Marriott was recently established. It fits into the category of a very young startup. We established it as a formal group. Our initial intention was to work on an informal basis, but we got advice it would be beneficial to do it, to give it some formality in order to ensure that the experts from the countries, they got sufficient political support and endorsement to participate in this joint activities. And what we aim and what we have in the mandate for Marriott is to serve as a forum for officials in charge of data management and analysis within R&D and innovation financing and sponsoring bodies to exchange practices, challenges, and coordinate common approaches. And here what we're trying to do is to meet an expertise gap and also a collective need, which from the moment that we established the group and we saw there was a lot of interest, we've come to realize that there was a genuine need there for officials in this area to to work together from an analytical perspective, not just an operational perspective. And it's important to underline that in an OECD context, we pay a lot of attention to the role that Marriott plays, working with lots of other different informal groups and activities, with the key aim to find synergies across these different perspectives to see what is the added, to demonstrate what is the added value of working in this area at the OECD. So we have an action plan that operationalizes the Marriott objective, and this is very much based around mutual learning on data standards and tools. Another theme has to do with actually delivering analysis in priority policy areas, and this is where the Marriott Group has taken on what we call the Fundstadt project, which is an initiative to find ways to collectively analyze project-level funding data, which provides an additional perspective on which to look at the number of policy questions that we cannot address through other means. And a third theme has to do with engaging with stakeholders. I will say something, let me touch on these points. So in terms of delivering analysis, we have a number of policy priorities for analysis, which are the result of a combination of what our parent committee, the OECD Committee for Scientific and Technological Policy, is interested in, and what Marriott delegates themselves are interested in. This was defined when we had the scoping workshop earlier this year, and was confirmed when we met only earlier this week on Monday and Tuesday. Our colleagues from Sweden were there. So some cross-cutting elements that have to do with interest in mapping R&D funding portfolios, but also using this information to shed light on the directionality, the impact, and the application relevance of R&D funding. And this is something quite important when you think about looking at, for example, to what degree funding for basic research is relevant to some of the challenges that our societies face. Is not just as simple as finding keywords and highlighting, okay, this project is relevant or not, but there is lots of fundamental science that provides the foundations for some of the solutions to be developed. So it's also our responsibility to find, to illustrate what are those pathways, and the experience of COVID in that regard is quite salient, because the science on which vaccines rely upon, you wouldn't have at the time been able to identify it as relevant to fighting infectious diseases if you had to look at some of the initial descriptions of the basic science project on which the vaccines are based. Currently, we are completing work on government agencies funding for COVID-19, and we hope to publish these results around February, March next year. And our key priority for the next 2 years is to conduct work around government funding of relevance to the green transformation and the achievement of the net zero challenges. That's something quite important to us. And of course, there is interest in the broader range of SDGs and so on, and also having the capability OECD-wide to address policymakers' questions about specific areas. So, for example, mobility, I know is a big issue within Sweden, and it's core to the Innova agenda in particular, e-health, other issues, to have the capability to address these questions internationally, learning from the experiences of countries. And of course, there's different types of indicators and so on, but I will not dive into that. Then there's a point about mutual learning, that the second, the other one of the 3 legs on which the action plan is based. So first of all is what an important point, and I think it came out very strongly at the meeting we had earlier this week, is to have a sense check about for how funding agencies use data. What are the purposes and uses, and what types of demands are out there? This help inform the discussion, the priorities identified earlier on, and how the administrative uses are intertwined with the statistical and analytical needs, because data can be repurposed for lots of different purposes. That interaction is very important. Standards is a key issue, how data linking, the use of identifiers, what represents best practices. And so we are quite interested in looking at how countries make a case for adopting certain standards and what are the barriers to that, and whether that's something that we should pay attention collectively at. Then there's also the issue of tools, the adoption of new tools to analyze data, like natural language programming and so on, which are very fancy. Not everyone is aware of them. Many people have heard of them, but then it's a bit of a black box for many non-experts. So how do you explain what the results and what types of processes can you base upon them? This is a very interesting area for discussion, which we have a responsibility to understand, to communicate to policymakers. And last but not least is the issue of mutual learning around data sources and data management more broadly. And so we are trying to develop a space for mutual learning, and a safe space where people can ask blunt questions and share experiences. And maybe from there we can assess the basis, what is the potential scope for any potential OECD recommendations where we think that consensus is possible and desirable. Bearing in mind that quite a lot of the administrative data is very country specific, so we have to start from that from that basis. So and then the third and final point, which is about engagement. So when STI established this expert group, it was pretty much with a view to having as well a mechanism for engagement, for the working party to engage with experts in this area, in funding agencies, part of government. Some of them were already coming to STI, but we didn't have a sufficiently broad-based view. So it's to start with, is an important mechanism for engagement among data providers. So and then on the basis of that, we want to explore synergies in terms of working at official level with national statistical offices, which are the most represented within the STI membership, and also a diverse range of officials who work with STI administrative data. And I alluded to a few of those before. And trying to see how we can work together. And third but not least, it's very important to think beyond the official level of engagement. There is a very broad and really well-established research and information community, a bit perhaps more established within Europe, perhaps less so in other parts of the world, that are very active in developing standards. So we want to make sure that we also have some standards in interoperability within STI and this group. So I'll be happy to talk more about this, and also with academia from diverse fronts. I think we also have to think to engage experts in the areas of who are producing some of the data analysis tools, people who are experts on some of the thematic topics that we are interested in, like let's say COVID or net zero, etc. So we also have to engage with them at these different levels. And on the research and information community in universities in particular, it's also quite important for STI to make sure we have linkages with the people who are on the accounting side of universities and research institutes, because their accounting data is a key element in what goes later into the reporting of R&D statistics. So again, being aware of all these interlinkages and working proactively to make sure that we get good and valuable results for everyone. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. I think I more or less kept to time, so I will be happy to answer any questions or comments that you may have, and just please bear with me because the audio in the room it's a bit difficult for me to hear. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fernando, and applaud. It's very interesting to hear, and we are very grateful that the OECD has created this Marriott group, because it gives us a possibility to meet with other countries, but it actually also helps us to become better on a national level, to talk more on a national level. I wanted to start with Garage and Annie. Would you like to comment on the work within Marriott from a Swedish perspective?
Yes, thank you, Fernando, for the interesting talk. I think this work is really quite exciting, and it's relevant for us in many levels, in many ways. Of course, it's really a great learning opportunity for us to participate in Marriott, but also it allows us to align our own work at the national level on our standardizing administrative research data to the international standards that are being developed, like in an early phase, which is really good. And I think particularly the Fundstadt project is really interesting for us, because in Sweden there are many research funders that are currently looking into different text analysis methods for example, identifying research themes or research topics from the text. And I think we can learn a lot from that. I think it's really interesting to follow the discussions on persistent identifiers, and which one should we go for, which ones solve problems sufficiently well. And yeah, of course, Marriott is not only a learning opportunity for us, it's also an important opportunity for us to raise questions that are important for us, and to affect what kind of standards will be developed. And I think it's really nice that Garage has been involved in the work, as in the steering group for the Marriott this year, and also recently elected to the bureau for the next year. And so I guess it's over to you.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for us in Sweden to be part of this working group, and we had the first official meeting on Tuesday and Monday this week.
Oh, so you just came back from Paris?
Yeah, more or less. And the first working group, really, the first official meeting of the working group really held its promise in terms of mutual learning and connecting with other experts. And I think the value of being in such group is so apparent. It forces us to raise our gaze, basically. We're often, as funding agencies, a little bit involved in the nitty-gritty, and it's really, really good. It's really beneficial for us to lift our gaze and look at what other countries are doing, how they're solving problems that we're also struggling with. And I think especially when it comes to those very broad thematics, such as COVID and the green transition, both these broad topics are in nature global. And so the approaches for monitoring and evaluating, for example, in the case of green transition, our progress towards making the society and the industry more sustainable, those standards need to be agreed also at global level. So I think it's going to be very interesting, looking forward, to keep on working with the experts and the working group at Marriott.
Thank you. And Fernando, now you have mentioned, and Annie mentioned, Fundstadt. That was like the first collaboration thing that led to Marriott. Would you like to tell us a little bit what was the content within Fundstadt?
Yes, certainly. The concept behind Fundstadt, it started around 2015 when we had the meeting of our parent committee at the ministerial level. This was the ministers of science and innovation from all OECD member countries and several partners in Korea. And there was the question at that time about how governments could kind of coordinate information about what they're funding. So at that time there was no consensus to build something to produce something concrete. But 1 year later, when we had our decennial forum on the future of science and technology indicators, we speculated that it would be timely to think of what would be a data infrastructure that would allow some interoperability of around the different funding data, allowing us to both look at the money that was being dedicated, because it's not just enough to count the number of projects, it's also thinking about the money, because it's a money talks, but also using the wealth of the text information in the projects. And the name in itself follows a previous OECD project that was called Fundstadt, which was to render to harmonize the different patent data for analysis, for statistical analysis. So we started from there, and then we realized that a lot of the funding data was not in the public domain. So we started working with some open data, but we also started thinking about what mechanisms we can put in place to analyze even funding data that is confidential, through thinking about what protocols can be built, and while working into making open data that can be open, for which there's no problem. So that's where we are right now. We did a proof of concept looking at funding agencies funding for artificial intelligence R&D project. That's something we published last year, and right now we've been busy with analyzing the funding response to COVID-19.
Thank you. So this, I think it can be found on the internet for those who want to read more about Fundstadt and get a picture of what you can do with administrative data. I believe there is a report that you can Google, isn't it? The Fundstadt.
Yes, that we have the report on artificial intelligence R&D. We still don't have a dedicated web page on the project. That's
another question to you. You mentioned standards, and Garage and Annie too, and the importance of setting standards together. But what would you say on a national level, since all national administrative data is unique, as you said, is it important that a country uses internationally adopted data structures, such as the SERIF, that is the European standard? Is that something that you would advise a country to map its data on an international mapping structure, so to say?
No, thank you for that question. I'm not an expert on the SERIF standard. I'm well aware of it, and that's something that I think we would like to do more in the context of Marriott, is to understand better how SERIF works, what are the advantages, what are the limitations, and what are the considerations raised by countries when different institutions when looking into it. I think that's the thing with standards is always the question is what is the optimal time to freeze? You know, when do you have to leave open? When do you have to freeze? And what types of tools or encouragements you can put in place to move forward with them? In my experience of looking at SERIF, I see that this was my earlier comment, that we have kind of a starting point, but then there might be some divergence in terms of how we call things, and also we have to think also about what are the context of applications. So some things might be fit for some purposes, but not for others. I think in terms of R&D administrative data, we certainly like to have something that is applicable to a wider range of settings, but that's something to be seen. But definitely we think that as Marriott, as a good as an interlocutor for OECD to engage with standards like SERIF, and as a matter of fact, I will be presenting to Eurocris in only a few days and sharing with them some of these.
So it's like everywhere in life, there has to be a balance between order and flexibility. I'm also wondering, this conference now is very much on national data. So with your position, you get an overview of many countries' data. Would you say that there are any countries within the Marriott that you think has come a long way, and that would serve as a good example, although you cannot copy another country's recipe. But are there countries that you feel are ahead?
I think it's. I wouldn't call it as a. I wouldn't refer to this as a one-dimensional race. That it's a. I would think of a tree expanding its branches in different directions, and I think from different countries we've been talking to, and discussions we had earlier this week, Garance and Annie can comment on that. We learned lots of valuable lessons about how different countries address challenges that were quite common but required solutions that had to go through the specificities of every country in terms of resources, approvals, and so on. So I wouldn't say that there's a kind of a ranking of countries in terms of, or our intention at least is not to make an index or that presents countries on that dimension, unless countries ask us to do something of the sort. Of course, the countries that start with sound foundations in terms of administrative data and high levels of trust between citizens and the organizations and the government, they have they are at the vantage point. But even in those countries, we will see that there's lots of silos, and it's difficult to navigate those silos. So you have to, again, find spaces where people can come together and find what are the common interests and join forces to address those.
What I hear you say is there is no perfect state as a goal. It's a learning process. Would you agree? Would you agree on this, Annie and Lagrange? Yeah, are there any countries who are there?
No, I think we're all figuring out basically the best approach and the best way forward, and that's where I think this kind of occasions where we can all meet and discuss is interesting. I think there is always some challenges because, as Fernando said, every country's national policy is a bit different. In Sweden, we don't have tax rebates, for instance, for R&D. Other countries do have, so it makes things a little bit difficult to compare and copy. But there's definitely a lot of inspiration to draw. And I think in terms of establishing common standards, I think there's also a strong need for standard methodologies, you could say, or methodologies that are sort of aligned globally, so that we can look at problems such as COVID and green transition with the same lenses, you could say.
And so it's perfect to have the Marriott now to do this together, so that not each country is doing it on their own. With that, I would like to thank you, Fernando, for sharing your expertise and your vision for what administrative data on research and innovation can be used for. Thank you very much for joining us from Paris.
Thanks to you. It's a real pleasure, and our intention is to make sure that these issues around research data are very much at the core of the policies that member countries implement, so that data is not an afterthought. So we want to really bring it to the top of their agendas. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and we're happy to work together with you on this. Thank you very much, and thank you, Annie and Garance, also.
Thank you.